Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to everyone to our latest class from Nur al-Idah wa Najat al-Rawah of Imam Abu al-Ikhlas Hassan ibn Ammar Ash-Shrumbulali rahimahullah ta'ala. We were talking about the burial rites and how to bury someone and the type of graves and what to do with the grave and what not to do with the grave. And we're going to continue with that now, talking about certain circumstances where we may be able to bury or not bury someone. And one of them is when we're out at sea, right? When we're in the middle of the ocean, let's say, what do we do if somebody passes away? Do we throw them into the sea or do we wait till we get to land, etc.? So, as usual, Sidi Hassan, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, Sheikh.
Hopefully, you're going to read for us and tell us what happens. Bismillah.
Inshallah, I'll do my best. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Whoever dies on a ship and is away from land and is feared that the body will cause harm to others, then the deceased is washed, shrouded, prayed over, and thereafter released into the water.
Yeah, so as you can see, if it's going to take a long time to get to land, it may well be best to do all the janaza rites, the washing, shrouding, and the salah on the ship, and then put the body into the water. What they say is to tie something heavy to it, so it doesn't float, basically. So tie some rocks or something like that, so it sinks or goes down rather than just comes ashore and comes to the comes back or something. So yeah. However, if there is a chance or pretty much it's safe and okay to get to land and do everything, then wait till you get to land. Once you get to land, do all the burial rites, etc. Inshallah ta'ala.
It is recommended to bury the deceased in the cemetery of the area he dies in or is killed. There is no harm if the deceased is moved a distance of 1 or 2 miles before being buried, though it is disliked to transport the deceased more than this.
Yeah, so again, where do you bury someone when they pass away? They're from this town, they're from this land, they were traveling. So only Allah knows where we were destined or where we are destined to leave this world. May Allah grant everyone a noble ending and protect them at the same time. We don't want to go right now, but so many are leaving us. Allah grant them all well-being and mercy and kindness. So we may pass away in a place where we weren't expecting to, or the person in our family or someone we know. What do we do? Do we take them somewhere else? Do we take them back to their city? Do we do what? So you're supposed to be buried where you pass away. The town, the city, the local cemetery where the Muslims are buried. That's the ideal, the proper way to do things. However, there's no harm in being moved. It says here, mil or milain. And mil or milain is not a long distance. It's a few kilometers, right? I think a mil here is about not the actual mile, mil. The mile I think here is about 2 miles, or maybe 1.8 or 7 miles, I think. So, if you have to go somewhere slightly out or transport a little bit, then there's no problem. To do large or far distances, that is disliked. That's not what should be done when somebody passes away. One should really stick to where the area is and get everything done. And it was always done in a quick way in the past. We think we're quick today. We're pretty slow. The amount of time it takes us to get the paperwork done probably, it's double the amount of time it used to take altogether in the past. And of course, that's the case we're talking about here, the UK, the legislation that's there. We can't avoid that, unfortunately. And weekends are more difficult. And even now, the restrictions we have, and it's difficult. It's difficult for a lot of people in different ways. But it should be done as quick as possible. And transportation is slowing things down. You might say again, oh, it's fast transportation now. We can go and transfer in an hour. You could go 50 miles, right? So that argument isn't valid because the idea of just moving the body 50 miles is the problem, regardless of how fast you do it. So we really need to try our best not to, Hassan's sitting there thinking, what about when they take them to Pakistan, or what about all of that? And is that allowed? And why are people doing that? Again, it's not really recommended at all. It's disliked. I know there's certain reasons people want to go back to their own homeland, whether it's Pakistan or another country. They say their family's there, their mum and dad are there, their brothers and sisters are there. But there's a Muslim graveyard here. There's thousands, hundreds of thousands of Muslims buried here. Your family is here that's going to go and visit you. They can go and pay their respects, make supplication for you on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, probably initially because of the loss and, and of course there are family in other parts of the world that will come and visit, but, that's actually not Islamically correct to go so far away just to be with family. That's not how burial works. You're buried where you are. So yeah, I can't really say much more on that other than we should try to stick to that and be buried where in the graveyard in the area that we pass away. Our families should respect that. Of course, you live in Bolton and you happen to pass away, let's say in Manchester. There's no harm in burying in Bolton. That's just up the road. But yeah, no, let's not say, well, he was from London, let's take him to London. People probably would because it's within one country's a road trip, but even then the actual ruling is bury the person where he or she has actually passed away. In general, right? So there would always be people who would do otherwise and want to do otherwise, but that's the rule. That is what has been mentioned throughout all Islamic jurisprudence and books. That's what we find in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. They didn't transport the bodies, they didn't move them around. The reason why we have that little addition is because that was the longest, the furthest any Sahaba or any of the early Muslims ever did transport a body after death. So there's a limit to that.
After the deceased is buried, it is not permitted to move the deceased to another location according to consensus, unless the land was taken by force, or unless the ground is taken due to the right of shufa, preemption.
Yeah. So I'm not going to explain shufa too much. It's a business transaction. But if somebody is buried in the land, there's no now moving that person. So after burial, there's no let's get them moving somewhere else, except if that land was private land and it had been usurped and it's come to light that by the judgment of a qadi is to be given back to so and so person. We buried people there. Well, what do we do? Well, I want them off my land. We had no right to bury them. If it appears to be as such, and he doesn't have to. He can say leave them there. But he says right. He should say leave them there, of course, right? We don't want to dig people up. But yeah, he has the right to say, look, that's my land, and I want to do this on it, I want to do that on it. It was taken by force of me. It was usurped. Usurped means it was falsely held by someone who can't physically take land, right? So I've got it back now, my rights, my documents. This happens in the world, right? People's land is taken from them falsely and then fought back and documents are produced. And it's a big, long story and headache for people around the world. But it happens. So if the land is taken back and all of a sudden there appears to be a graveyard that's found its way there or graves, he can ask for them to be taken and moved. It's not like immoral of him to do that, but it is also good of him to say, look, leave the graves. I'll leave that section alone, right? And the graves stay. So in that situation, yeah, that situation, the grave can be dug up and the deceased moved. The other one is when the land is similar, land is taken by someone, but it's not by force. It's taken by shufa, or the right of shufa, which is basically, not to explain in a lot of detail, is when land is sold, the neighbor never got his say. The neighbor comes in and says, wait a minute, I had first right to the land, I want to take it. Okay, he takes the land. In the time it took him to take the land, somebody's buried on the land that he's supposed to buy. If somebody's buried before he bought, he can't do anything, right? He needs to understand it. People buried on this land, you can buy it with the people's graves or without, or don't buy it. It's during the period of the sale that he was supposed to have a right to take it. Land, somebody was buried. It's a weird one. It's not commonly known, this masala. It's the right of a neighbor to take the land, basically. If I sell land, right, the right actually primarily goes to my neighbors. But I sold it to somebody from London. So the London guys, I've got the land here. Let me bury somebody on it. Okay, he's buried somebody on it. My neighbors come around and say, wait a minute, you sold land. We have a right to that before him. And they have, by Sharia, they have a right. So they can say, right, you want it. So, oh, right, yeah, you do have a right. They go take a case now and say, we have a right to this land. You weren't informed it was being sold. You sold it to somebody random. We want our share of it. We want to get in there. So they'll pay the price that was agreed by the other person, by the way. So what price did they pay? Same as the other person paid. And they can take the land, yes. So that's going to take time and process, right? It could take weeks, months even. In that time, the graves being dug and people are buried there now for whatever reason. These people now take over the land due to the right of shufan, the right of the neighbor. Oh, wait a minute, we didn't want those graves there. They weren't there when the sale took place. They came after the sale. The person who purchased should have waited for us to see if you want out. So they can decline their right as well. Right? So yeah, let them have it. They should have waited for the person, the buyer who's now got to go back to London with nothing, should have waited for us and asked us, whether we want the land or not before burying people on it. Please, can you take them off? They have the right to ask that. So we had one.
If a person is buried in a grave that was excavated for someone else, then the value of the excavation is to be paid and the deceased is not to be removed from the grave.
Yeah, so I mean, talking about here, graves, digging them up, moving the body, etc. So now somebody is buried in a grave that was readied, was dug up for someone else. So sometimes people pay for graves to be readied for them, or they already in general, and it's paid for as well. They're not free. I mean, they do offer in some parts of the world free burials and grave sites, etc. But usually there is a cost anyway. So somebody might have their grave dug ready for themselves, or the family might be doing it for a deceased person, and all of a sudden somebody else comes along and buries their deceased in there. Right? There's a grave there. Right? Let's get them buried by mistake, deliberately, whatever. So what happens? Do we bury somebody there? We dig them up now and say, right, that's somebody else's grave. They paid for that land. You've used somebody else's land. It says here, no, we don't. You don't dig up the grave of such a circumstance. You just pay the cost. What did it cost you guys to get that, whatever, right? The cost price, Qima. Here, this much, yeah, that's it. There you go, and the cost actually comes out of the money left behind by the deceased, because he's supposed to pay for his own burial and shrouding. Well, the money you use for that is taken from his inheritor, his legacy, what he leaves behind, his terika. What you leave behind, first thing that's taken from it is your shrouding, your burial rights, etc., and then the rest is inherited by the family. So that's what you do, it says, right? So you wouldn't dig up the person to say, "Here, it was the wrong grave, sorry," it's another grave in the graveyard. You might say, "Oh well, what if it was next to his brother's, and now there's a gap between his brother and his this stranger that took the grave, etc." and all that. It doesn't matter. That's life. You can bury him above, below, to the side. If you can find a closer spot, fantastic. But, it's a mistake. Hopefully, not deliberate. And mistakes happen. We don't dig up people for that reason. And it's going to be a few meters away more. That's all it is. That's not the end of the world. And I'm sure when he gets to the barzakh, he'll be fine. Just physically out on the face of the earth, they, 4 or 5 more meters apart in the barzakh, they're pretty much together.
It is permissible to unearth the grave to search for goods that fell in it. Okay, it's also permissible if shrouds were taken by force or something valuable remained with the deceased.
Yeah, so now when we dig up the grave, it says, is if there was a valuable item that got buried. We don't dig up the deceased and take him out. We open the grave up and we could take out any valuables that may have fallen in or were left behind. But they say the valuables have to be of a reasonable value for that to take place. Because obviously, if there's minimal stuff, then there's no need for any like you said, £10 in his pocket. Leave the £10. Don't dig up a grave with £10. But he had £1,000 in his pocket. You forgot about 1,000. Oh, yeah, 1,000 is a lot of money. We're gonna have to dig that up and take 1,000 out. I think most people would think, let's take that out. You don't have to either. You don't have to. It doesn't say it's permissible, right, to dig up the grave, take out wealth or items of wealth, including if the person was shrouded in a shroud that was usurped, so it's not his property. It was stolen from somebody else. Stolen property is different to burying in the wrong grave, right? It's a stolen property. It's forcefully taken. There's a right of a person that's usurped. Is a right of a person. It's taken by force of him. So he can say, look, that wasn't fair on me. I want it back. Dig up the grave, dig up the person as well. Actually, change his coffin, which is really tough and horrible. And again, this person whose coffin was taken shouldn't be so upset as to say to the person, to the family, whoever, dig him up. And you should let it go, and they should get paid off, right? You obviously get paid off because he's got something taken from him. But it did happen in the time of the Prophet ﷺ that a grave was dug up for something that had fallen. There was something there, and he had obviously some value, so it was done, so it's allowed.
The grave is not to be unearthed if the deceased was placed in the grave facing a direction other than that of Kaaba, or because the deceased was placed on his left side.
Yeah, so as we,
Remember those first.
excuse me, as we discussed a few lessons ago, the deceased is to be placed on the right hand side, facing the Qibla. Okay, what if when they did the burial, this is why you have learned people there to help, but what if they did mistakenly bury him not facing the Qibla or on his left hand side, on the left, the body is not on the right, it should be on the right, slightly leaning slightly towards the right. Um, what do we do now? Somebody says, oh, the Qibla is that way. We just buried it this way. We got it the wrong way around. We did it upside down. Or we did, what do we do? You leave it. You don't really go up the grave, turn the person around or turn him over to the side, etc. In that situation, we leave things as they are, right? La yumbashu, right? It's not allowed to dig up a grave. Um, this means here it's fully done. If it's not fully done, you can obviously, you've got a few spades of soil have gone in. Yeah, in that stage, go back. It's going to take you 5 minutes to sort it out. But if you're talking here fully buried, and all of a sudden at the end, when everything is done, we realize, oh, well, most things are done. Wait a minute. Somebody starts saying, did we do this right? The Qibla, the headstones are all over there on the graves. But which people face it? There will be a Muslim graveyard. There will be people buried there already, hopefully. It may occur when there's no Muslims, so that might be a more likely occurrence. But yeah, it is what it is, and we need to be aware of that. There's 3 days of mourning after the person dies in general for the family. That means 3 days where people pay condolences, where you may have to obviously sit around and meet visitors or people. People want to obviously come and pay their respects. So there's a procedure. When I was in Syria, they did it in the evening. So family in the mornings didn't sit around and nothing. They went on their business, maybe at home, maybe going out doing normal things. And in the evening, people would come. So after Maghrib, Isha, that time, and they'd usually have a little space in their homes or rent a little hall out where the family would come. We do it in the masajid or the community centers today. In the UK kind of thing. And for 3 days, they would have that process where people could come pay their respects. And that's it. They would disperse after that. And if anybody wasn't able to make it in 3 days, you can later on go to the person in the shop, in the house, wherever you see them and say, oh, I wasn't able to come. No, sorry about your loss. You can still say that after the 3 days, but you should really, the sunnah and the proper is to do it within those 3 days. In terms of the food, in terms of the rituals, everything else, what goes on, there is a few rules. One, that you shouldn't cook for the guests. The family who's mourning shouldn't be cooking for the guests. Okay, if they get somebody else to cook or somebody else decides to cook for them, which is often what happens for them, that's a good thing because they need food. They might not even be cooking because they're so busy or just tied up in things, and sending a meal around is very helpful, by the way. I think, oh, I'm sure they can do this. They can order now, right, and stuff like that. But really, it's helpful to send a meal over. It really is. It's a nice gesture from the neighbors or the surrounding Muslims, etc. In terms of them providing food and drink, etc., again, they shouldn't be making it and stuff. But when we were in Syria and we used to go to these condolences in the evening, they did serve tea. So they go around. They didn't want to serve tea themselves. They would have like waiters. They'd hire a hall out. So they'd hire a hall out. They'd recite the Quran. They'd make du'as. People would come, pay their respects, and go. That was all it was. People would come and go, pay their respects. No conversations, no chit chat. Just Quran being recited, du'as being made. People talking to the deceased family, the family of the deceased, paying their respects. Sitting there for a while. There's chairs laid out. So basically, just a hall of chairs laid out to sit down on. Small halls, big halls, depending on the family and the amount of people they're expecting. Some were big, some were small, like I said. And sometimes scholars spoke, so sometimes the scholar came, and we went to the ones obviously with our teachers or people we knew, so scholars tended to attend. And sometimes they were actual scholars that passed away, so it'd be massive, condolences, and many scholars would speak. So you listen to speeches, and the speech would be about reminders of death, the afterlife, the legacy of the person gone, the responsibility towards those living, etc. So it was a nice speech, and we used to hear good, guidance and stuff. So that was what was happening in Syria, beautiful. And they'd serve a little bit of tea, so they'd have a little waiter going around, or a few of them. And they have little cups, and they just put a little bit of coffee, the bitter coffee, or they had like lemon tea and stuff. They just standard stuff. That was it. That's nothing wrong with that kind of stuff, because you're not putting a feast on, and you're not going to problems to honor your guests. Or we've got few people close, we've got to do all this for them. No, you've got not to do anything for them. The idea is pay respects and go. There's no hospitality required in that situation, which is what the Prophet was telling people. When people visit you on this circumstance, it's not your duty, and it shouldn't be your duty to cook for them, to provide for them, to do this, to do that. A glass of water is not a problem. A little bit of tea that's already prepared and being distributed is not a problem. You're not going to any taklif, any troubles to do that. That's fine. So that's a good example of how it's done. Other places, they tend to put on a feast every day. Come and eat. Don't leave before you've eaten. We've made food for you. We've ordered the food, etc. And again, if a non-family member of the deceased does that, if somebody says, this family now, they've lost their father, mother, uncle, whatever, they're going to be doing all this stuff. We'll just help out, and if people come, we'll give them food. If people come, we'll do this. That can be done. So the thing is, the family shouldn't be doing stuff, because the Prophet told us not to do that. They shouldn't be cooking and cleaning and providing refreshments and this and that. If somebody else comes along, or if somebody else supports and does that, and it's just a process there, then it's not wrong. It's not the end of the world, and it's not a bad thing, right? So generally speaking, 3 days of mourning. In those 3 days, food isn't really an element that should be worried about or presented. The family need to eat, they'll eat. People are visiting condolences will do that. And they don't come to eat, they come to pay their condolences and respects. And that's it. They're gonna leave after that. And yes, some of close family, they might stay a day or two, and etc. There's no need to start putting feasts and start asking everyone to stay and eat and stuff like that. There's timings and etiquettes to everything, right? So hopefully that's enough guidance there for everyone in that matter. Yes, I know certain cultures, traditions maybe do things differently, and this is just how people want to do things. And unfortunately, they want to do it like, oh no, we don't care. We want to do this for our relatives. We want to do this. We want to do this. Like I said earlier with other rules, we follow what the Prophet ﷺ and the Sharia teaches us, right? Because that's the best thing. That's the way Allah wants us to be and behave and practice. So let's try and do that, inshallah ta'ala. So the next section is on visiting the graveyards and the cemeteries. Let's read that. Bismillah.
Visiting the graves. It is recommended for men and women to visit the graves of the departed, and this is the soundest belief.
Yeah, so the Prophet ﷺ said, I used to prohibit you from visiting the graves. You're not allowed to go. Ala fazuruha, but you should now visit them. Right? So visiting the graves is recommended because the Prophet commanded it, in the sense that encouraged it, and that's what the correct opinion is, or the most sound opinion is. As we all know, there is a ruling, or fatwa, let's say, that women shouldn't go to the graveyard due to the problems, due to the trouble, and that was the case. If you look back at that, it was a problem, it was an issue. They were at risk for going. It was out of their protection. There were bad things going on and stuff, right? So out of the benefit, the rules aren't given to harm people, they're there to benefit people. The general rule became women shouldn't go to graveyards. I think now it's still in the balance. I think they should, if they want to, and can maintain the etiquettes and be kept safe and so forth, which in some parts of the world that's still not easy. In other parts it is, and it can be done. So yeah, visiting graveyards, and that would apply to men. If men were in danger to go to the graveyard, they shouldn't go either, right? But we just want to make a point that that ruling of women not going to the graveyard isn't from the Prophet, or isn't a ruling, it's a fatwa. What's the difference between a ruling and a fatwa? A ruling, what I mean here, is a ruling of the Sharia given by the Prophet ﷺ in the text. It's not there. That's why Imam Shubalali here in this book has given you the ruling of the text. There's no prohibition. The fatwa is a ruling, still a ruling. It's a judgment passed upon a particular situation. Okay, and sometimes the fatwa is not, and it's not known, and it's not, it doesn't set a precedent. Okay, it's just for that situation, and that tomorrow, if you look at that situation, and look at all the various factors and parameters, they could change the fatwa. Okay, so in that time and place, many scholars, I mean, a long time ago, in many parts of the world, not just one or two parts of the world, many parts of the world decided, gave the fatwa due to the circumstances, the factors, that it's better for women not to go and they shouldn't really go to the graveyards out of protection for them, out of avoiding harm and problems. Um, so that's not a ruling that we have to now pass on from generation to generation. That's a fatwa that applies to a circumstance that could still be the same, right? It's not gonna, they're not gonna automatically just for that time and stop. They could carry on as well. It just depends on the factors and parameters, like we said. And some regard them to have carried on in certain parts of the world, so they continue to issue the ruling in fatwa, the legal uh, edict that women shouldn't go to the graveyard still. And so you might find that still said in some parts of the world and still practiced. As far as I understand, I'm not saying it for myself. I've heard many scholars, Maulanas, sheikhs, big scholars of various Islamic institutions, say that it's okay for women to go to the graveyard as long as they maintain etiquette, as long as it's safe for them, as long as etc. etc. So with all of that in mind, it is okay and recommended for everyone to visit the cemetery, the deceased, and visiting the individuals. To be honest, not visiting the grass and the soil. But yeah, people want to do that because they're family. They want to pay their respects not from home but from the grave side, right, from the next to the person, which is recommended, by the way. The Prophet asked us to do that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But let's carry on then. What do we do for the deceased after the burial at the graveside? What is it that we should be doing? Bismillah.
It is recommended to recite Surah Yasin, as it has been reported from Anas, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever enters the graveyard and recites Yasin, Allah will relieve them therein, and he acquires a reward equal to the number of them.
Yeah, mashallah. So reciting Surah Yasin to the deceased, even without this hadith, is well known from the Abu Dawud hadith, which the Prophet said, read Yasin for your deceased, right? Upon your deceased. So that's the very famous, very well-known hadith of this. This is where the idea of reading Surah Yasin comes from. We say, why do you read Surah Yasin for the deceased or upon the deceased? Because the Prophet said it in a hadith. And in this one, it mentions that you get the reward of however many people there are in that graveyard. Allahu alam, mashallah. Just to point out, I was looking for a note in the hadith about the rewards for reading Surah Yasin for the amount of people in the deceased in the graveyard. It says it's narrated by Sahibul Khalal bi sanadihi an Anas ثم أشار إلى ضعفه. So it's regarded as a weak hadith. The sound hadith, which is just generally recite Surah Yasin, doesn't mention the rewards for the graveyard. But that doesn't mean it's bad, it's a rejected hadith. Weak hadith are weak hadith. They use sometimes for virtuous acts and encouraging virtuous acts, especially when they've got a foundation. So this already has a foundation, as the Prophet said, read Surah Yasin. Another hadith, which is not the same hadith, which is not a sound hadith like the previous one, mentions a particular reward for that at the graveyard. Then we can take that as a virtue, inshallah. We don't have to take it as a certainty and encouragement for reading Surah Yasin. There's a way of working with hadith that the scholars have discussed and disagreed over, and have certain conditions and parameters when it comes to weak hadith. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that since I've just seen the note I've got there. So do dua for them, read Quran, and don't do certain things as well. Go ahead, Hassan.
But just to clarify on the point Yusuf just answered, there's no problem with reading Surah Yasin as you going past the grave.
No problem.
Graveyard.
You don't have to sit and read it. If you want to read it out through the graveyard, like Yusuf saying, it's walking through the graveyard. In that time, you can read Surah Yasin 8-10 minutes. And as you're walking through, you can walk and read the Quran. Obviously the best thing to do is sit and read and, etc. But you can walk and read the Quran, no problem.
There is no dislike if the reciter of the Quran sits near the grave, and this is the option.
Yeah, so to sit on the grave is not good, right? But if you have nowhere to sit and you want to sit and recite, then sitting to one side of the grave, not directly on top of it, like bang, but yeah, to the foot of it, so somewhere over the grave your body might be, which can happen. Then then yeah, that's permissible because you're doing a good thing. You're not trying to disrespect. You're sitting down to recite.
Sheikh, is there anything with regards to, again, it's probably something we overheard, but when you visit a grave, it's better to stand, they'll be facing Qibla, so it's better to stand closer to their head where they'll be facing, rather than stand at their feet.
This is you should approach from the feet. It's very commonly said, it's etiquette more than rules. Approach from the feet side, stand towards the Qibla side, so that they, like I said, their head is facing you, because you don't want to be behind the person you speak to them or address them. You're going to say salam, you're going to sit there, you're going to read Quran, etc. So the etiquette is to be like that. Pay your respects, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to relieve them of their difficulties, make dua for the ummah, and it's time for general dua as well, reflection. Reflect over the time they had and how you could be there soon. It's a must. That's one of the big lessons, that when you go to the cemetery, the graveyard, it should really change you when you come out, right? Like, these people have gone, they've had their time, as you said, right? They've had their time, yes, that is true. What am I doing with my time? Where am I going to be when I go to this place? That's scary sometimes when you think about that. That as much as we think we're healthy and strong and living a full life, enjoying everything, tomorrow could be close as well. We're gone. And what did we do? What did we achieve? What were we leaving behind? What's our legacy? And that's one of the things the Prophet said, that he wanted us to reflect. When you go to the graveyards, reflect on death. That was something that he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah, so carry on, bismillah.
It is disliked to sit near the grave for other than reciting the Quran. In addition, it is disliked to step or walk upon a grave.
Yeah, so like you said, sitting for reading purposes, fine. If not, then yeah, why sitting on a grave for? And of course, it's disliked. Sleep at a grave and do anything else of that nature, fulfilling the need, etc. But then,
it is disliked to sleep on a grave, and it is prohibitively disliked to relieve oneself on a grave.
Exactly, yeah. So those things, big no-nos. Carry
on. To remove moist grass or trees from the graves is disliked.
Yeah, so because greenery and trees are good, yeah, we don't remove them. We leave them on the grave, so we don't, what do you call it? Uproot them. I said that as well, the fresh ones, right? The fresh ones. But then what about the dry ones? It says, yeah, so there's no ba'as, la ba'sa biqal'il yabisi. So if things have dried up and you want to remove them, weeds, etc., then that's fine. That's not a problem. It's just the fresh ones, because the hadith says that the Prophet placed fresh branches and they were a relief for the people of those graves. They were punished. Let's hope there's no punishment in the graves that you're visiting, but it's a blessing anyway. So leave the fresh stuff there and clean up the the dried up stuff. That's just etiquette's good stuff. So that's just it's not an exhaustive kind of section there on visiting the graves, but it's some things there that we need to bear in mind and follow, inshallah ta'ala. And then the next section is on the shaheed.